I get to deeply dive into whatever teachings are being offered in these books. And it's always a growing opportunity for me. So thank you very much, Edo-san, for giving me this opportunity. It's been very useful to my life and hopefully to the lives of others as well. So, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see all of these faces that some of you I don't know, but many of you I do and practice with for many years. So, it's really great to see the old crowd um, and the new crowd. And so I appreciate that. Um, so I'll say just a little bit about what I've been doing with this book the last week during Rohatsu Sesshin. I um, have done a lot of solo Rohatsus just because of the various circumstances I've found myself in December. And I enjoy doing solo retreats now. At first, I wondered if I'd be able to do it, but you get into the routine and it just kind of flows. Um, and I always leave a period of time where a Dharma talk would fit. And usually I will read a book during that time, and sometimes I will read it out loud. And my favorite text up to this point has been Uchiyama Roshi's Opening the Hand of Thought, which I have read for Rohatsu 5 or 6 times. And the book is just covered with underlining and marginalia and all of that. But every time I read it, I find something new. And this book is much the same. I believe I've probably read it 3 or 4 times as an editor, but you read for different things when you're editing than you do. I mean, you get the flavor of the text, but you look for different things than when you're actually reading it for yourself and to get meaning out of the text. So I read this book during Rohatsu this year. Excuse me. And I didn't get it finished. I didn't get all the way through it. I got into this section 3, and there is so much meat in this particular section that I sort of got hung up on this particular section for 2 or 3 days. So I didn't make it all the way through the book this time. One of the things I noticed about this text is the way that when you're reading this text, in addition to chanting the various texts that we chant during the services during the day, you start to recognize that Gien Roshi is saying exactly the same thing that those texts also say, particularly Sandokai and merging of difference and unity, which are very similar in themselves. And then you add in what Uchiyama Roshi is saying, and you can see many corollaries. So that really struck me during Rohatsu this year, how much overlap there was between Gien Roshi's teachings in this book and those two texts that we chant regularly. Because they talk about arrow points meeting, which is a very, you can't make arrow points do that. And Gien Roshi often says during this text that you can't make enlightenment happen. You can't make a plan and then accomplish it and become an enlightened person. You will miss the mark. So in both of those texts, they talk about arrow points meeting. And that's really what he's talking about, And if you're just a little bit off, you won't quite hit the mark. So I really noticed those correlations this time. The thing that struck me the most about this book, though, when I first, the first time I read it, is the way that Gien Roshi uses indeterminate language to talk about the body and to talk about that which animates the body and life itself. So he calls it this. He talks about this. And in some other traditions, they will use the word that when speaking of what we like to term the absolute, the world of non-form. We'll talk about that. And I got into a fit of sesshin giggles when I was reading this text this time, because I just found it hilarious that we even try to talk about these things. We have no specific language to encompass this enlightenment because it isn't graspable by any sort of method, and particularly not through language. So then we have to say this and that. And I just thought it was hilarious that we even try to talk about it at all. But we have to have some way as teachers and as students to point to that change of perspective, that enormous transformative change of perspective that enlightenment is. So I think generally when I'm working with a group with the text, I will just sort of go through the text and take questions and make comments as things come up. So I'm curious as to what this particular section brought out for you, and if any particular questions arose out of the questions that Roshi was answering, because his teachings in response to the questions are often just as profound, if not more profound, than his commentary.
I did have some questions about one thing I had trouble kind of understanding was that talking about equality and not understanding what was really meant. Say on page 91, talking about if you make a mistake in the true meaning of equality, the same kind of thing can happen because you see things through your feeling of sameness or difference. And it was kind of saying that equality is, I was having a hard time understanding how the term equality was being used and how it was being said to make things different rather than equal.
Yes, about equality being immediately different.
Right. That's what I couldn't really quite understand.
Yeah. Boy, this was a tough one for me too. I have that section marked, and I have a big star there, and I have study this because it's not immediately clear exactly how that works. so in the merging of difference and unity that text talks about, they're talking there about unity and difference. And that's the world of form. And when we look at, I guess you could almost say it's like the two sides of a coin, to use a really well-worn image, where you've got one coin, but you've got a face, and you've got the heads, and you've got the tails. So they're and I think he's using that word equality perhaps not in the same way that we would think of that, because for us in American culture, equality is all bound up with democracy and other sorts of concepts. And so it says there, the Buddhism, the teaching is that equality is immediately difference. So I am a person and you are a person, and we are both people, and yet the two of us are very different kinds of people. So that might be a little bit of what he's getting at there, but I think it's probably way more profound than what I'm able to say about it.
As I read a little further, I kind of started thinking that in order to think of things as being equal, we really have to see them as two separate things in order to compare them, in order to see them as equal. And so maybe that's where that immediate difference comes in, that separation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he talks a lot about looking at things, and the eyes just see things as they are, and obviously they aren't the same things.
Right. But the eye sees them all equally.
Right.
Yeah, without any kind of judgment or
yeah, and sees them as they are, and they're all different.
Right. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to get one's head around. And I think a lot of these teachings open themselves up to us the more that we study and the more that we practice. I know there are things that we say in those texts during the morning services that were really completely opaque to me when I first started practicing. And the more I practiced, the more I understood what was being said. So I think that this is probably one of those examples where, like Dōgen Zenji says, you can only see as far as your eye of practice can reach. So it depends on where you are in your journey as to whether or not this makes any sense to you or not. Is there anybody else that might have some thoughts about that particular section?
I'll just say I had lots of question marks in the margin along there. I mean, like not just one. I had like a whole line of them down the margin.
Yes.
For that paragraph. And Cynthia, I think you're the one who said person A and person B, or well, I translated it that there's two people, and we get, for me, the section we just talked about is like the moment we're see another person, we have this strong capacity to immediately look for difference. And suddenly we're separated from them so rapidly. and yet we are the same. And then he goes on to say we can describe difference in the same way. While it is different, it is equal. So, you know, I guess we just, to me, we just have such a strong inclination to go to that way that we are conditioned to be. You know, it's just no one's told. In fact, we're only reinforced in our development to look at our uniqueness, at least in American culture, to differentiate ourselves one from another, and not look for what is same as much.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Karen. So was there something else that someone wanted to bring up that you found particularly helpful or opaque, obtuse? I think one of the things that always that I get from reading this text, I'm continually astonished at some of the things that he says. Like down at the page, bottom of page 96, he makes the statement, the sense functions can, in accord with what they encounter, become any state. The sense functions can, in accord with what they encounter, become any state. And we just don't think about, I don't think about myself as capable of becoming any state, the sense functions. So that's quite a statement to make, and to project oneself into that experience, it seems to me like is definitely outside the ordinary everyday experience, while being actually who we are. He says then at the top of page 97, they, the sense functions, act infinitely irrespective of your viewpoints or ideas. So he talks about the mind as an idea, which is also something that we don't often encounter in perhaps Western culture so much. We more revere the mind and the intellect and look to reason as our measure of whether things are true or not. And this is a completely different way of functioning in the world. Without, you know, without reason, just turning yourself over to the senses.
Jikyō, I'm not sure I understand what he means by become any state. Does he mean that a sense function, I just don't even understand what that means.
Well, you know, elsewhere he says, and I don't remember if this was before this chapter or if it's something I read later, he says that the body is open. The body is open and anything can enter. So that it also is another rather astonishing statement to make. The body is open and anything can enter. So I think that's related to this statement he makes about the sense functions can, in accord with what they encounter, become any state. So he talks about the woman who grabs hold of a hot thing and is enlightened. But at the moment her hand grabbed that hot thing, her hand became hot. So her touch became heat itself at that very moment. So I think that might be a little bit of what he's talking about.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Well, what I was going to say is that then it seems like this quality of the pure functioning
Yes.
of the sense. So becoming any state, is it dual? It's either going through our mind or it's pure? It's just its essence? I don't.
I think it is. It's the function of the sense itself. So whatever that is can be anything in accord with what we encounter in our environment. So if we go outside, then, in the opposite sense, and it's cold outside, my skin becomes the cold because it encounters that environment. And he talks a lot about becoming the environment when we are sitting in meditation, to become one with the environment and to let go of ourselves into our senses, to abandon ourselves to our senses and become one with that. Become one with that. When we, at the end of our talk, we say, Buddha's way is unsurpassed. I vow to become it. And when I was in training at Shasta Abbey, whenever this word "it" would appear in the text, it was always capitalized. So I think of Buddha's way is unsurpassed. I vow to become it. From Gien Roshi's point of view, it's capitalized. I vow to become it. It's a different way of approaching it, approaching that situation, in becoming the environment, allowing the senses to function so that we become the environment itself. He tells that story about Buddha's enlightenment on page, let's see. Okay, on page 103, the very last page that we were looking at today, up at the top of the page, he talks about Buddha's enlightenment and how you don't understand anything about this. You don't know you're one with things, as Shakyamuni Buddha didn't know until he was awakened. So even if we abandon ourselves to our senses and just allow them to function in the pure way of functioning, as you were saying, we don't even know that we are in that state until we actually wake up. So, and that's when he says there's nothing more intimate than not knowing. So we're in it, we're intimate with it, and yet we don't even know that we are in it. So our senses can become any state, can merge with it, as in merging with difference and unity. It can merge with that. We become it. We become the way itself. And that's what I think is so really wonderful about this teaching, is that he really makes it clear that we become the way itself.
Jikyō-san?
Yes.
I have a related question on sense functions. And so when Roshi is quoting the guidelines, he says, he talks about the when enlightenment is harmonized with training, you cannot step on even a single particle of dust. And so it's this word dust that I have a question about. And I think elsewhere in other Buddhist schools, there's a reference to the six dusts, and the six dusts are the sense perceptions, which are color, sound, smell, taste, touch, object of mind. And so is he using the term dust here in that sense? And then could it be that you're not stepping on one particle of dust means that there is no perception at all?
I think that's a correct way of looking at it, because he talks about, if you look a little farther up that page where he's talking about Shakyamuni and his experience of enlightenment, when you truly become one with the thing itself, neither you nor the thing itself exists to the extent that you aren't aware that you're one with it. You are completely dead. And he talks about earlier when he talked about Dōgen Zenji's enlightenment, he said his mind was completely dead. So I think that is, you're correct in thinking that it's talking about no perception. It's a state of, I wouldn't say quiescence, but a complete stillness. So we have these two opposites in this way. We have the stillness and we have the movement. And it's such stillness, such utter and complete stillness, no mind moving, no senses moving, everything has stopped. And then something moves, the mind moves, and there is that recognition that, oh, this is the way I am. So I think you're right in that respect. And one of, oh, go ahead. I don't want to go off on another tangent before I make sure that.
No, thank you. That was my question. Thank you.
Yeah. I think he is talking about dust in that way. One of the things that came up for me when I was reading this part of the chapter as well is that he really is talking about the 12 links of dependent origination. And I made up a chart that Edo-san is going to send out to you afterwards when Joyous Refuge was studying the Heart Sutras, Red Pine's translation and commentary of the Heart Sutra a number of years ago. And it has all of the different links of causation that the Buddha saw when he was enlightened, when he saw the morning star. He realized how all of this, how this functions. He had this vision or understanding, I think I would say more about how this functions, about how it begins with ignorance and then intention enters in and then consciousness appears, etc. So I think it's helpful to have that tool, this particular chart. As you can see, it's kind of complicated. And I took part of it from Red Pine and part of it from Steve Hagen's Buddhism Plain and Simple. But it's one of the fundamental understandings of Buddhism. And it's where the Heart Sutra arises from. So he's really talking, even though he doesn't ever mention the 12-fold chain of dependent origination anywhere in the book, Um, the concepts that he's talking about here are connected with that. So that when Amr mentioned no perception, perception is one of those things. There's the senses, and then there's contact with the environment, and then there's sensation. So then we think we see something, we think we know something, we see objects out and separate them from ourselves. And it's a useful tool, I think, to have and to keep in mind when one is reading about how the senses function and how we give ourselves to the senses during Zazen. Another of the things I did during Rohatsu, I'm staying at this very beautiful home up the mountain in Port Angeles, and I have a view of the Blue Mountain from the front deck, which has a roof over it, so that I could sit out there no matter what the weather was. So I did a lot of sitting outdoors, which I understand some of you have done as well on Saturday mornings. And that was, and tried to become one with my environment, tried to relax into my senses and just be with the senses and not make a narrative about what was happening. That narrative is what gets us in trouble so many times when we're sitting a long retreat. We get off on some story and get lost. So it was really helpful to be there and be cold and have the wind on my face, and it was a good experience. Highly recommended if you haven't tried it. More comments or questions from this section?
Jikyō-san. Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you. Thank you.
You too, Brian.
So on page 99, I really struggle with understanding the mind or thinking as a sense function. And it says in the second paragraph, there are a couple sentences in, with regard to thought as well, there is absolutely no impediment. And Dōgen expressed this as, if you still try to look, there are white clouds extending for 10,000 ri over the whole sky. And I guess I don't understand what that, in regard to thought, what does it mean when there's absolutely no impediment?
Hmm. Well, he talks about it being beyond the imagination. That views and ideas get in the way of the liberated functioning of the mind itself, because we have some kind of idea that the mind is a thing or an object, whereas it's really just a function of a human being, and it is not something to be overcome nor or discarded. It's just there. So if we leave it alone and we don't interfere with it, interfere with its natural functioning, it just goes on and does its thing. And our these words are so treacherous. You don't want to call it the self because it's not the self. It's just this collection of functioning. But that's what I think he means by no impediment, is when one can just allow the mind to be as it is without interfering with it, with your views and opinions.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
So I related to that, I wonder if this seems correct. So if I see a thing, I see something that's red, and I see the red thing, the active functioning of seeing it. But if in my mind that becomes something other than a red thing, it becomes, well, that red's a little different than the red that I was expecting it to be, or the red that I've known it to be, or is that the extra layering of my views and my conditioning, instead of my mind just saying red or just experiencing its redness, I start layering on what I understand red to be, or this thing to be about its redness, or I didn't think it was going to be red, I thought it was going to be this, other than just acknowledging its redness. Is that taking the mind, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yes, then you've got white clouds for 10,000 ri. Yeah, that's exactly it. Because we're, from the time we learn how to begin to talk, we are taught to give labels to everything. So to allow our senses to function without labeling everything, without the narrative, without having to say that's beautiful, or make some kind of a comment internally about everything. Learning how not to interfere with that functioning is the way.
I think, like Brian, I understand with the other five senses, or with the five senses, like the seeing, the pure function of seeing. I mean, I think I understand it, or of hearing, or of touch. But my pure functioning of mind is really, no one taught me that in kindergarten.
That's correct. And no one teaches you that to you unless you come to Zen practice, most likely. It's the concept, the idea of the mind just gets in our way. It's very difficult to step out of that, the narrative, the curation of experience, if you will. It's very difficult to step out of that, to let go of it. And that's why Gien Roshi talks about how Dōgen Zenji let go of everything. And the Buddha, Shakyamuni, he let go of everything. it's it's um it's a practice, letting go of everything. And that means the mind as well, because we're afraid, like he says, at various points in this text, we're afraid that we won't be able to function in the world without the function of the mind. We're so used to using it for our own convenience. That's another wonderful phrase that he has. We're so used to using it for our own convenience that to let go of it, to actually just let it function on its own, is horribly frightening to us. It's a kind of freedom that we don't want to have. I remember a teacher that I was studying with at one point describing his particular deepening of his enlightenment. He talked about the whole experience of his enlightenment as the initial experience, and then there were several deepenings, and then it's continued to unfold. But one of the things he talked about was how one day he was sitting on the couch and he got up to go into the other room, and he felt like he'd forgotten something. And then he realized that the narrative had fallen away and it's never returned. Mm-hmm. So that little voice that we all have in the back of our minds or heads, that little mind thing that keeps going like this all the time, that can stop. Mm-hmm. If we can let go enough, it can stop. And yet, there's nothing wrong with that teacher. He still functions perfectly well. He just doesn't have a narrative anymore.
That's really helpful for me, because I was thinking where I get hung up on that is that with the function of the mind and just letting it be is that the thoughts themselves are ideas and concepts.
Exactly.
So just by having them, you're already not there.
Oh no, just by having them, that's just the function of your mind. It's not getting caught by them. That's the important thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On the top of page 102, it says, in regard to Shakyamuni Buddha, he stopped thinking and stayed just as he was. He did this completely, and then, without even noticing it, all viewpoints of the ego fell away. That to me kind of resonates with what you were just saying about just that voice stopping. Is that what's being said there?
Yes. The viewpoints of the ego fall away. Absolutely. Yeah. And then he follows that up. He says, life was assured in such a way. And so he just stayed that way. And the translators have said in there, everything worked fine without him doing anything. So when we say, and then there's nothing to do and nowhere to go, we actually mean that literally.
Simple, but not easy.
We practice. But I do think Gien Roshi is very good at putting these things in a simple way so that they can be understood by anyone at any level of practice. That he says that in such a way that you can take it in. He tells you little stories about your nose, just acting on its own without you having any say in it, that it's going to smell whatever it smells. So, yeah. And it says in that same section, before one thought arose, there was nothing. There wasn't any thought. Thought as an opinion or an idea didn't stir at all. And then spontaneously, wham, it happened. You can't think yourself into enlightenment. It's not possible. Because that very function interferes with the unfolding of awakening.
Is he saying that a thought is like a sound that just comes in through your sense organs and that you're open to?
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. That it just comes. We don't know where it comes from either. That's another thing that he says is, we have no idea where these things come from. We don't know where we came from. Uchi Amoroshi likes to say, we're just an accident. All of us, each one of us is an accident. Our parents accidentally ran into each other and accidentally made us, and we're an accident. We don't know where we came from. And Gien Roshi says the same thing. We don't know. That's the intimate thing about not knowing. So a thought can be just like seeing or hearing, and you don't have to get caught by it. You don't have to attach yourself to it. You can just let it go. Let it fly by. He says on the top of page 103, this life is assured as it is without any effort. We don't have to make an effort for our life to continue. So we don't have to be afraid that if we let go of our mind function, if we stop trying to control it, if we stop trying to tell ourselves what to do all the time, we don't have to be afraid that we aren't going to be able to function. Life is assured as it is without any effort. We don't have to do that to ourselves. He says a little farther down, you make a mistake because you try to get this by discipline, which suits your way of thinking. You must completely throw away any sort of idea to achieve this by means of thinking. If you can simply let go of that, then certainly this will happen. He's talking about enlightenment will happen, or becoming the way will happen. Almost like that better. These terms are so overused now, enlightenment and awakening, and it's very difficult to get to the actuality of that itself because of the interference of our language and our concepts with that happening.
Jikyō-san?
Yes.
So I just wanted to share that Karen was talking about how it's more difficult to apply this line of thinking to thought than maybe some of the other sense functions, and so one of the things that Kondo Roshi had mentioned or said in his Teisho a few weeks ago was exactly what we're talking about now, which is that the reality of the fact is different than what we were thinking. And then he said, when we practice Zazen, this is the most important point. So in other words, if that's the most important point in Zazen, that's what it's okay that we don't understand it now, sitting here and talking. We practice it in Zazen.
Yes. Yeah, and it's okay that
Thanks,
we don't.
Amir.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. We don't have to understand it. In fact, most of the time, he says, we don't even know that we're in it. So it's not possible to understand it by thinking, because we don't even know that we're there. We don't know that we're one with that. So yeah, we don't have to understand it. We're just doing it.
Jikyō?
Yes.
I'd like to come back to what you previously said regarding the accidental nature of the universe. We're all accidents. And I find that very attractive in the sense of it helps me perhaps see the working of the universe as more randomness. Even though I, as a scientist or a scientific background at least, I see ecosystems, functioning systematically. But the idea of randomness is attractive in helping me maybe not understand, but at least accept why bad things happen to good people, for example. But what I can't reconcile is the idea of randomness and the accidental nature of the universe and karmic consciousness, the collective experience of our lives individually that lead us to this very moment right now. Karma in the sense of causality, cause and effect. Can you help me understand those accidental randomness on one hand and karma on the other?
That's a biggie. And the thing is, Larry, I'm not even sure that it's relevant. We talk about, and you'll see in this 12 links of dependent origination that I put together, there's a column on there that says karma. But I think it's a really sticky wicket that contains a lot of concepts that we get attached to. And it's all wrapped up with one's understanding of no birth and no death and all of these difficult things that seem amorphous and beyond understanding. But I want to come back to that, to karma and an accidental nature of the universe. What I see before me here just happens to be this thumb drive, okay? What I do with that thumb drive is a cause, and it will have some kind of an effect. But the fact that it happened to be lying here at this moment is accidental, okay? And I have to come back to that I'm not sure that understanding or reading about these particular teachings is how it contributes anything to our ability to awaken. In fact, I think a lot of times it's one of those wrong paths that Gien Roshi talks about, in that we start looking for karmic events or chains of causation. And I don't think in the end that that really matters. That's not what really matters. Mm-hmm. What really matters is practicing and getting to the heart of the matter. And so I think it's a bit of a distraction to go down that road. And when Gien Roshi talks, and when Uchiyama Roshi talks about accidental, that we're just an accident that I show up in this particular time and place. And Gien Roshi says, our activity arises out of nowhere. We don't know where it comes from. That's not really tied into the whole thing about cause and effect. We know it's there, and it's certainly a concept that is often discussed, but from my understanding, it doesn't contribute anything to awakening, which is really what we're here for.
Yeah, we know it's there, but we don't need to put so much emphasis on it. I mean, for me, overanalysis is a real rabbit hole, even a black hole. But I think what I hear you saying in a way is similar to, or analogous perhaps to what Suzuki Roshi once said, to the effect, our true nature is beyond our conscious experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else for the good of the order? Any last comments, questions?
Well, I have just one. And this is just going back to the quote. If you still try to look, there are white clouds extending for 10,000 ri over the whole sky. And that's following that when he says there's absolutely no impediment with regard to thought or the eye, or seeing. And to me, the key is that if you still try, if you're trying, that extra effort, that it's already happening without the trying.
Right.
The seeing and the thoughts are coming and going. It's already happening without the trying and the manipulating and that's why when we try, we don't see. So I was just thinking, that went along with some of the questions earlier. So
Yes, so true. So true. It's trying to make it happen, and we can't make it happen.
Yeah.
Jikyō?
Yes.
Hi. What keeps coming up for me let me back up a little bit. During Rohatsu, not quite sure how to explain it. The idea or notion that the mind functions in an analogous way to the eyes or the ears or the nose or what, and so I pretty much cut it loose and was watching the show for several days, and I guess what kept coming up for me was practicing in delusion or within delusion, and the mind doesn't stop doing what it does, but it seems that and this is where I get tied up. It's because I don't want to say it's how I view the mind, because that's not right. Well, perhaps that's what you were getting at when you let it all go, and I guess I don't know how to do that. I can watch it all happen, but I'm constantly in it all the time. And I don't know, well, at any rate, that's where I'm at. I'm chasing my tail a lot. So.
Yeah, well, and I think that whole thing that Gien Roshi says about not getting caught by it, and it's just that's the practice. You get caught and you let go of it. You go, oh, I'm caught, and I don't know, I know that the mind can get more quiet after a long period of this kind of practice, that the mind sort of just goes a lot more slowly. And so, yeah, you said you were chasing your tail. So it's important not to chase it, which, of course, I think you were practicing that. It's not, but I think it's a good thing to think of it as one of those senses. It puts it more in perspective. So if it's just another sense, if it's just like your eyes and your ears and your skin and your nose, it gives it less emphasis. It takes it out of its king place. It takes the mind off of its little throne, dethrones the mind, puts it down on the level of everything else about the body. So it's something that this does. It's just something this does. And the more we refuse to get caught by what this is doing and just allow it to happen, then I think that's the point that we want to get to just allow it all to happen. And we're not even watching it at that point. It just becomes this doing its thing. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, on some level, perhaps what I is recognizing the caughtness and what that feels like and what that's about. And yeah. Someone said earlier, and I just wrote down in the margin, the internal narrative falls away. And I have a very lively internal dialogue going on most of the time. And maybe that's what the quieting that you referred to is when that kind of, when I shut up. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah. Pat Inko O'Hara said, I remember in one of the books we did earlier, she said that when she sits down and her mind is just going, she says, stop. Tells it to stop, you know. I thought, okay, that's pretty good. Just tell it to stop. If that works.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Unless there's something really urgent, she said, looking at everyone.
Yeah.
I think thank you. That was good.
Well, we are very, very grateful for your appearance with us tonight. Hope you will come again. It's very nice for me to sit back and listen to a teaching and really enjoy it and learn a great deal from it. So very much appreciation from all of us, I feel very sure. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Beings are numberless, I vow to stay save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to become it. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Our reading for next time will be the next chapter. It's only about 11 pages. So let's take up the entire chapter, and if we don't finish it, it's okay. We'll take up what we can in it. But I think that it would be well to read the entire chapter, and we'll go from there. So, and also everybody, take care out there, everywhere you go. Please be really careful. As we know, our country is in a difficult time. The whole world is in a difficult time with COVID. And so please take care as you go. And we face lots of challenges right now in all kinds of spheres. So let's move through it with grace and confidence and kind of a non-attachment to it. We know the outcome. It's going to be good. We don't have to worry about getting caught, as you say, along the way. So let's do our best. Anyway, thank you very much, Jikyō.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again. Please come again. Please come again. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Right.
Good night. Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Jikyō.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.